Hello and welcome to our Chapter 16 Principles of Accounting 2 tutoring session. I'm Victoria and today we're going to be talking about process costing. In the last video I spoke about job order costing. Job order costing is where you have individual jobs that are customizable when you're in your business and you're producing inventory. Today we're going to be talking about process costing. Process costing is where the items that you're selling, so your finished goods inventory, are all the same. Okay, so we're going to start out and I'm just going to go through the main ideas of the chapter. Okay, and I'm assuming you've read the chapter for this, and so let's just talk down to it. On page 847, you'll notice that there's the process cost system and the job order cost system. So there's the two different types. If you've watched the chapter 15 video and now this one, you'll understand the basic ideas. All of the items on the left, for example, soft drinks, oil, computer chips, and chemicals, all of those are composed of the same items that cost the same amount, that are the same size, and so on. On the right, you'll notice that advertising, movies, ice rinks, and patient health care, those are very customizable. Okay, those will cost different for each of the items or services that you're selling. Okay, so process costing, as you'll notice as you read a little bit about how the journal entries will work for this, are very similar to job order costing. Still to increase your accounts for raw materials, factory labor, and manufacturing overhead will be a normal balance debit. Okay, so that's the same. So as far as journalizing transactions, Chapter 16 is very similar to Chapter 15. I want you to notice on page 848, you'll notice in the last video I talked about the job order cost flow, so we'll just review that again. So you've got your raw materials, your factory labor, and your manufacturing overhead, which are in the blue box on the far left. Then you've got your work in process inventory, and work in process inventory for job order costing is organized by job. So you'll notice you have job 101, 102, and 103, etc. When you finish those jobs in job order costing, they go to finished goods inventory, okay? And then when you sell your finished goods inventory, it goes to cost of goods sold. The difference between the cost flow of job order costing and process costing have to do with the work in process. Okay, so for job order costing, within work in process, you have your different jobs. For process costing, each department of a business will have their own work in process. Okay, so if we are making tables, okay, that's just a common example. If we're making tables, okay, there might be a department for assembly. There might be a department for cutting. There might be a department for assembly, cutting, sanding, and maybe even polishing. Okay, so each department is going to have their own account of work in process. Okay, and that's what's in the process cost flow on page 848. So make sure you understand that your work in process is by department. So if I'm in the assembly department, we're going to have a work in process. If I pass it on to the polishing department, they're going to have a work in process. Okay, because each department will be working on what they do to a particular item in their own department. Okay, so what I'm working on right now is not going to be the same work in process as the polishing department, because if I'm putting the table together, it's not ready to be polished yet. So the next work in process will be for the polishing department. So that's one of the big ideas of process costing. On page 849 at the bottom, you'll notice that we're looking, or that particular diagram is looking at the ledgers again. So again, we're taking our manufacturing costs, assigning it to work in process for a specific department, Department A. Then Department A will assign that work in process to Department B, and then it will go to finished goods and then cost of goods sold. So the main difference is work in process, okay, between job order costing and process costing. As I said earlier, the journal entries will be the same for Chapter 16, very similar as to Chapter 15, and that's on page 850 to 852, so make sure you understand still how to do that. On page 853, it goes into something called equivalent units, and later on in the chapter, you'll be, and I think for your homework as well, you'll be doing a production cost report. An example of one of those is at page 861, so let's talk about a little bit what you have to do for that. On page 853, you'll notice equivalent units is the heading. And the example that's given on page 853 I find extremely helpful, okay? So if I'm a university, okay, and I have part-time students and I have full-time students, okay? And we'll just go ahead and use this example that's on page 853, okay? So total cost of instruction are $9 million, okay? And it says that the student population of full-time students is 900 students and part-time students is 1,000, okay? You can assume that the full-time students are going to take a full amount of hours, okay? But in that paragraph right below the top blue box, it says part-time students take 60% of the classes of a full-time student during the year, okay? So what that's saying is as far as class taking is concerned, a part-time student is equal to 0.6 of a full-time student, okay? So what you'll notice in the second blue box is if you've got your full-time students, which are equal to one full-time student, okay, will be 900, plus you have 1,000 students that are part-time, okay, multiplied by 60% of what they are compared to a full-time student, okay? So it says full-time equivalent students is 1,500, okay? So what that's saying is in the top box, total students, whether part-time or full-time, okay, is 1,900, okay? That is equivalent to physical units, okay? You'll notice that probably in the glossary and maybe even when you're doing you will notice it on the production cost report. So that's equivalent to your physical units, depending on whether they take one class within a semester or if they take 5 classes within a semester. They take a class. So any student that takes a class is 1,900 students, okay? So that would be equivalent to your physical units, anything you have worked on regardless of completion, okay? The second part, the second blue box, it says full-time equivalent students is 1,500. So you might think if we have 1,900 students, then why did we calculate a number for 1,500? 1,500 represents how many students you would be instructing if they were all full-time students with regard to cost, okay? So if all of those 1,900, okay, if all the students were full-time, okay, you would have 1,500 students, okay? So you can have more part-time students for less classes. So you can have more part-time students that won't take as many classes as more full-time students, okay? So I hope that wasn't confusing. I thought that example was really helpful if you think about it that way. So if we were going to apply that to our production cost report, what you'd be doing is big picture. You think, let's say we're the assembly department, okay? And let's say we have assembled 100 tables, okay? But we are working on 50 tables. We're working on assembling 50 tables. So, as far as my department's concerned, we have 150 physical units. Regardless of how much they're completed, whether completely finished or 50% finished, we have worked on them, okay? Equivalent units of production means if we had taken all of our resources, okay, and put them into completing certain amounts of, assembling certain amounts of product, tables for example, if we put all of our labor and raw materials and effort into those few items, okay, we could have made X amount of full items, okay? So you'll be doing that, if you look on the, at the very bottom, that's the weight average method if you've read the chapter. So you'll be doing the units completed and transferred out, so that would be the 100 that I finished, plus equivalent units of ending work in process, okay? So that's how many equivalent units I have at the end of my work in process, equals equivalent units of production, okay? So you also need to make sure you're familiar with the equations on page 855. That's a little bit more of what we just talked about. And like I said, you're going to be using the weighted average method. And the rest of the chapter is talking about making a production cost report. I don't know if that is one of your assignments, but you will need to know how that works. And a very good example of that is on page 861. So I hope that was helpful. That was process costing. And those are some of the big ideas that you've read in the chapter. And if you have any questions, feel free to post them on the question and answer board, and we might have another video if needed. So I hope that was helpful, and we'll see you next time.